Is there a reason there's no optional voice chat for whoever wants to communicate better? Ooh, this one's always spicy. I'll give you a quick response. I don't want to get stun locked though. Voice chat is really good for competitive games. Valorant, League of Legends, Rainbow Six. Really good for competitive games. Really good for coordination, stuff like that. When voice chat is in your game, it is significantly harder to moderate than text chat, and it can result in some incredibly negative outcomes for members of the community, especially members of the community who sound different. If you want to understand what I'm talking about, go ask any girl who plays Valorant how their experience is in voice chat. And you're going to get very often a fairly negative answer to that question. Now, oftentimes when people ask about voice chat, they say, well, why not make it optional? Or why not make it so you can just mute people? The two things about that is, first of all, when you mute someone, the damage has already been done. You've already been attacked. You already feel unwelcome. You already feel miserable. Muting is important, but it doesn't solve the problems. It just gives people an ability to protect themselves from the problems. The other idea is, well, like, why not make it optional? If you don't want to be in voice chat, you don't have to be. Voice chat is a competitive advantage. If you make it optional, it isn't optional. You can opt out. You are putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage. Another thing you look at in Valorant is, in Valorant, high MMR players actively get mad at you when you don't use voice chat. And it's right for them to do so, by the way. It's okay, like, not right, but like, it makes sense for them to do so, because if you aren't using voice chat in high MMR Valorant, you are not only putting yourself at a disadvantage, you're putting your teammates at a disadvantage because you aren't communicating with them. And so in high MMR Valorant, it's actually like very frowned upon when someone doesn't communicate. And so again, you could say voice chat is optional, but it is not optional. If you put something like that gives such an extreme competitive advantage into your game, players need to be using it. And if they're not, they're putting themselves and their teammates at a disadvantage. So that is the hard part. That's kind of the idea there. That's what's going on. And just, that doesn't mean League shouldn't have voice chat. I want to be very clear. When I say all these things, it doesn't mean League shouldn't have voice chat. But I'm just trying to make people understand, to have some empathy, because voice chat straight up is very difficult to moderate and can have really, really negative outcomes for players who sound different. And that's not something you can just hand wave and say it doesn't matter. You can't just hand wave that away. That's not the correct approach there. Doesn't mean League shouldn't have it. There's a lot of benefits for having voice chat in League that I can think of. Like, as an example, voice chat in League probably makes things like Rise ult and Galio ult much more playable, because you can communicate with your teammates what you're trying to do with them. So there's definitely a lot of advantages there. Anyways, that's my voice chat rant. I promised I wouldn't get stun locked, so we'll keep moving. How do we get back to fair agency distribution among all players in the game? I would argue that it would make the game worse. So the question is like, why can't all players in the game have an equal chance of winning? Ideally. Like, if you're equally skilled, shouldn't you just all have an equal chance of winning? And I'm going to give you a spicy take here, and that would make the game worse. And the reason for that is players pick champions and roles for very different reasons. And so if we were in a world where, say, support had the exact same impact on the game as mid lane, that probably actually serves neither of those player bases. Because many support players are not playing support to have the highest impact on the game, and many mid lane players are not playing mid lane to have the same impact as a support. So for starters, by ensuring certain roles have carry potential or things like that, or supporting potential, we are changing their agency, but it's often a good thing because it lines up with what the players of those roles might want, for starters. That's important. If you're looking at individual characters, the same thing holds. If you're picking Yuumi, you do not have the same interest in your agency outcome on the game as if you're picking Yasuo or Lee Sin. A Lee Sin player probably expects that through sheer skill alone, he can win every game of League of Legends. And so if we give him agency to win it, that lines up with his expectations. Whereas a Yuumi player, quite legitimately, if they're locking Yuumi, probably does not expect they have nearly as much agency as the Lee Sin player to win the game. Otherwise, they'd be locking Thresh, as an example. And so it's also not necessarily valuable that every single character in League have the same agency and ability to win the game, because different characters offer different strengths and are being picked for different reasons. And so I think the idea that every role and every champion should be equally as potent and have equally agency to win the game, I think is like a little flawed, because it means that we start like homogenizing roles and classes and champions in ways that probably make them less enjoyable. Another example of this is like there's this idea that if you're an AD carry, you should always be able to outplay an assassin. I don't share that opinion. I think if you're an AD carry and the Rengar is fed, you should instantly die. Unless Janna is there. Unless Lulu is there. Unless you have a friend to keep you alive. And that's about class differences and class strengths and weaknesses. It is important that assassins have people to feed on. It is important that AD carries sometimes have people to protect them. It's important that AD carries can destroy tanks, because that's what they do, right? It's important that if you're a mid lane mage, you probably have a hard time against some assassins and like a really easy time against people you're trying to burst. It's important that if you're a tank support, you're really good at engaging and probably less good at like keeping someone alive with healing, etc, etc, etc. It's like League of Legends gains a lot of benefit from the fact that in some situations one class has an advantage, and in some situations another class has an advantage. So if you're an AD carry, I think it's actually probably really good that you die to Rengar, and to make that okay, it probably should be really important that you're really good at taking down tanky targets and have good sustain damage and can carry the game if you survive, things like that, right? It's like a give and take. And so sometimes you'll hear this like opinion of like, hey, every character against every other character should always be a skill matchup. And while I generally agree that it's good that like there are skill matchups in League of Legends, it's actually a good thing for the game to sometimes be like, yeah, I picked Malphite. You picked Jax? That's rough, dude. You shouldn't have picked Jax, bro. I'm Malphite. Right? Like, that's okay. It's okay to have matchups like that sometimes. It's okay to have matchups that are built more on like properties of the characters than like raw outplay and skill expression. This is not me saying League shouldn't have skill expression, but it's me saying that like League of Legends is a game that thrives on strengths and weaknesses of different classes and characters when compared to each other. It's good that sometimes you can outplay on Yasuo and be a god, and sometimes you have to figure out how you're going to survive, because in this situation you can't outplay, and so what are you going to do? Right? That's important. So yeah, I have people in my games who say because of my pick they'll run it down in champ select and go TP ghost. Why is there nothing set to deal with players doing such? Those players should be banned, and I think it's very sad that champion select reports do not result in them being banned. That's really the only opinion I have on it. I'm not on player behavior. I'm not in that area of the company, so like I can't tell you anything about like what we should or shouldn't do. But mainly like it does feel very wrong that champion select you can't like have a way to like deal with people who are holding lobbies hostage. Like those players should legitimately be banned for doing that, and I wish that we had ways to make that happen. But again, I'm not on that team. I couldn't give you the context on like why or why not, but like obviously that behavior is like pretty bad for the game.